What is going on, Black Mill TV family? Welcome back. It's one half of Black Mill TV, Franklin. Shout out to the Daily Rapper crew. They were doing a podcast. I enjoy the content that they do on the podcast, and we're going to be reviewing one of their videos. And it's one of the videos that I do love. I've always wanted to have a conversation about. You see what I'm saying? Have many money conversations behind the scenes, but now it's coming to the forefront in terms of the different Black communities talking. I think this is one of the great conversations to have. And being someone who has a duality in terms of the Black community and experience being in America, West Indian and African community, as well as growing up in the UK, kind of have a unique perspective from my perspective and my experience growing up that I want to share with you on it. So let's get into the video. Let's see what's going on.
All right, so we got to do Ressa. I think that's Coil Ray.
Yeah.
He made a tweet. I don't know this one, but he said Americans don't even know what island they come from, just black like the color. So my first topic is, why do non-black Americans always say black Americans don't have culture?
Okay, so the question is, and it's a very good question. He says, why do non-black Americans, as in black people outside of America, I'm presuming, say that African Americans don't have any culture? And I'll be 100% real with him. It's due to the propaganda that's been portrayed by, let me put it to you this way. During World War II in Nazi Germany, the Germans used a style of propaganda to discriminate and ostracize the Jewish population, right? We all know this is history. So what we've had is that in order to cause division and fear amongst the groups and to not allow cohesion or cooperation within the Black community, and in regards to West Indians, in regards to African Americans, in regards to African Blacks, what the propaganda has done is to feed a false narrative to each and every single one of them, right? On top of that, what I see in this modern generation and what we've lost over the last few years is that amongst Black people as a whole, we tend to think like, oh, there's no class system. We know there's a class system, but we try to act as if to say it doesn't exist or it doesn't influence how, things are. Everyone should just accept me for me and they should accept me for who I am. That kind of social construct and social narrative hasn't exactly borne fruit to the truth, if you understand what I'm saying. Because just because you are who you are and you want people to accept you for who you are does not change the centuries-long institution of the class system. A lot of Black people like to talk as if to say that we are free, but we are not free. We still live in an oppressive economic capitalist system, which was based off the slave system. So by that, and when you look at the slave system or those who instituted the slave system, they had a class structure. Every civilization has a class structure. You have your your super elites, the upper class, the upper middle class, and then you can break that down into variations. But in the Western civilization, and this is what a lot of Black people don't realize, I think, or take really into consideration, is that those class structures still have a monumental impact today. For Americans, I hear that the culture of America is, when you come to America, we're Americans. So it's like America is like a race of people. You know what I'm saying? Or I get what they're trying to do in trying to make the identity of the culture and identity of the nation. So what they've done is by saying anyone who comes over is now American. In order to be American, you must eat, drink, and act like an American. When I'm in Rome, do as the Romans, right? So the culture of America has a duality where you've got the class structure that's running through it, you've got the slave system that ran through it, and which overlaps it. Now, prior to slavery, you had rich aristocratic Caucasian people, and in their class system, they also had the aristocrats, the upper class, middle class, and then everybody else was peasants. There wasn't no working class sort of thing, it was just serfs, right? Peasants. So when slavery came in, what that did is elevate the peasants slightly above Black people, because Black people were slaves, they were property, etc. Right? So again, this is no shade at white people, Black people, any racist thing like that. I'm just answering this question because I think it's a very important question, especially in this modern times, because we as Black people are disconnected from each other's history and story. And coming from or being someone who was raised in the West, born in Africa, raised in the West, traveled around from an African and a West Indian parents, I've been lucky enough, and I don't know if to say lucky enough, but tormented enough to be able to see all the sides of the equation at the same time, seeing how easy it is to just interlink each other if we all just actually came with some sympathy and empathy for the other side, right? So because you have the class structure between the European class structure and the slavery class structure intertwined with each other, once the slaves were free, that culture started to intermix, meaning the peasant culture of the Europeans now became adopted by the slaves. So this is where you have what we call ghetto culture, right? That they so-called call black people doing. That ghetto culture, that was originally the peasant culture of the Europeans. So now, in order for you to be Americanized, what happens is that the slaves now adopt the serf culture or the peasant culture of the Europeans, right? Putting them into that class system. A similar thing was done over here in the UK. What the UK did is, whereas in the United States they had segregation and it was open segregation, in the UK what they did was that they infused the working class Europeans with the colonial slaves from the colonies, because the UK didn't bring the slaves over like that. They used the colonies and had the slaves in the colonies and only brought few slaves over when they needed to use them and send them back. So when during the Windrush era, where they bring a lot of West Indians and subsequently after that Africans over into Europe, into the UK, they put them into the working class system of the social level of the Europeans. So what you see is that you see this culture or this notion that all black people are either lower class, working class, or underclass, right? Which is not true, because of course in America you still had your upper class African Americans, you still had the middle class, and that was born from that whole era of, because you were segregated, you had to build those structures. Whereas in the European side of it, those structures were built back home in the West Indies or in Africa, and it's particularly in Africa, we didn't lose those structures per se. Those structures were still in place. There was just a different level of colonial slavery involved in it. So those processes were slightly different. So when they say why black Americans lack culture, or why do other black cultures say black Americans lack culture, is because we understand that there's still a class structure system. But what we see in terms of the media and in terms of the propaganda through the so-called hip-hop, through the so-called boss bitch culture, through the so-called get rich or die trying, through the so-called accept everybody culture, the letter movements and all those things, what we see is a culture that says, irrespective of your class, you can behave and act whatever you want. That is an issue for other people who are still within a class structure that understand that, hey, if you're middle class, yeah, okay, you can probably get a working class person, but that person has to come with some level of decorum. If you're dealing with somebody within the middle to upper class, you should understand that there's a certain level of etiquette that comes with that, a certain level of class, a certain level of je ne sais quoi, let's say, you know what I'm saying, that comes with how you're gonna, deal with that person, or interact with those people. So when you see this conversation, when I was growing up, I heard from my parents, listen, don't deal with no West Indian girls. Why? Because the perception that was given about West Indian women was that yardie thing, you know what I'm saying, the ghetto thing, the bad girl thing, you get me, Miss Ray thing, the pum pum girl, all the rest of that stuff. That's not conducive to having families and relationships and elevating the family into a different class structure. Likewise, we were told don't deal with no American girls either, or my cousins were told don't deal with no American dudes, in terms of homeborn American dude, meaning descendant from the slaves. So why? Because that same rhetoric and that same narrative was pushed worldwide. So yes, Americans can celebrate that their culture has gone worldwide, but again, you've got to look at the image of that culture in which you're portraying. There is a class structure outside of America. So when you push a system of I'm a boss bitch, I can do what I want, that's not the class system of a middle class to upper class person. That's going to be the class system of, sorry to say, ghetto, down the hood, underclass, peasants. So if you give that narrative and that perception, then people on the other side will be saying, well, I don't want you to marry X, Y, Z, etc., etc. And for me, this is where it really comes down to. It comes down to the misinformation narrative and the propaganda that's been imposed and pushed and fed to each of the different cultures. In Africa, they're shown, oh, you want to be in America because they've got everything in America. The only problem is they're not taking advantage of it because look how they act. They act, the women throw their ass all over the place. The men don't put their women in check because the men are too effeminate. You see what I'm saying? You've got different kind of letter movements and transformations going on with people's gender. So it's like, from the outside, it looks like a whole bunch of craziness is going over there, right? So if you're going to come over, they're going to say the generation of parents that come over are going to say, hey, don't mix with these people. Outside of the fact that Americans also seem to realize that the people that come over from Africa to America, they've had to go through a heck of a lot to be able to do that. And majority of those people come from a middle to upper class family. That's why they go into education and they come up with certain high degrees, because they come from middle to upper class families full of education, lawyers, doctors, accountants, whatever the case may be. So they're not going to America just to have fun. They're going to America to do something. So when they get there, the parents are going to say, don't interact with these type of people or this type of female or this type of guy, because they don't want you to bring in or dilute the culture that of class that they have already come with or they are trying to attain themselves to. It's nothing personal. Let's find out some more.
Where's he from?
He's from Canada. I don't know exactly what like island or country he's from, but
so you see, I like the question that he asked when he said, what are some of the negative stereotypes you heard about African Americans? Now, it's funny he asked that question because I would be interested to hear what are some of the negative stereotypes he has heard about Africans, considering that, and this is what makes me laugh about African Americans. Africans were never en masse in America like that in terms of coming over after slavery. That's more been a recent thing in more the last, 40, 30, 20 years even. So African Americans on the whole have been dealing with themselves and, the nations that are over in the Americas. So when they're having this thing, my question is, who gave you these stereotypes? So when you're calling someone an African booty scratcher, that shows me that you have zero knowledge of Africa as a whole. You think Africa has still got lions, tigers, and bears, and it's a safari. But that lets me know that you only know about the propaganda, which is what's shown by the media. So again, that's the misinformation and the lack of urgency and responsibility on our part as Black people to know about ourselves. And especially in America, like I said, in America, they live in an echo chamber. And because America as a culture lives in an echo chamber of itself, being the top nation in the world, the pride and the arrogancy tends to be, I don't need to look at or understand or empathize what other nations are doing or how other nations are dealing with. As a result of that cultural mindset or perspective of America as a culture as a whole, African Americans have also adopted that, being American, right? So this is my perspective. You don't like it, don't lump it, whatever, okay? Move to another channel. But if you do like the video, leave a comment down below. Let's get into some real conversations. So, for me, it's like, it's not like they were doing something wrong. Either side were doing something wrong. It's not that. It's both sides have been brainwashed and propagandized by someone else's information to feed their best interest and to keep you divided. Because what I see that's grown up in the African American community and what I see that's happening in the African community and the West Indian community is that there's a lack of empathy for each other's history and historical paths. There is a social class that took place and that has taken place and that always has been in place outside of the world. So because that social class has been in place, when Americans were taken into slavery, they lost that social class. They've had to adopt their own social class, which they did during segregation. But then integration kind of messed that up because now their social class is now mixed in with the Caucasian European, so they think, but they're not actually mixed in with it. That being said, so the other Black nations outside of America see this and they're like, well, hang on a second. The culture that we see permeated on TV, the propaganda, that's not the culture we want to adopt or we want brought back in. So they usually say, the stereotype, don't marry an African-American dude or don't marry an African-American woman. Why? Because an African-American woman is usually, I'm strong, I'm independent, I'm a boss. B, don't cook, don't clean. These things are not conducive to being a wife and following on family tradition and children. For the African American men, when the daughters are told don't marry the African American men, is because there's this mindset and this notion of effeminization and hyper masculinity, meaning that the thug guy, the road dude, the Pookies and the Ray Ray, so to speak. So there's that perception. Do you see what I'm saying? So those two perceptions are what are given to the African. And to the Americans is a fear of Africa. Don't go to Africa. Africa's full of booty scratches. Even though all the minerals and everything else that's in the world is used comes from Africa, you don't want to go there because they sold you into slavery. Better stay here with us, the people that bought you, because we were so kind-hearted that we bought you from your oppressors. Yeah. So that's what, I know I'm being facetious and I'm being, funny, but that's what, the propaganda they were shown. So then you have the West Indies, where the West Indies have both dualities. There's a side of the West Indian classes that very much prioritize education, just like in the African side. And there's another side in the West Indian population that has the negative stereotypes. So in each of the culture, what do we have? We have the negative stereotypes. For the African one, for example, scammers, fraud, 419, etc. In the West Indian one, we would have baby fathers, baby mother dramas, all that kind of stuff. In the American one, we have the same thing. Baby mother dramas, baby father dramas, hood games, shooting each other, right? But each one of those three propagandas are shown to the opposite one in order to cause the division from the opposite one so that we don't have unity. Instead of us, because the enemy's not going to do that for you, it's upon us to show each other the positive sides of what we have to bring and what we have to offer in terms of coming together as a community. So the question is multifaceted. I'm probably going to revisit it again, But if you enjoyed the content, you enjoyed the video, please like the video, leave a comment down below. I'm going to leave it there. Big shout out to the Daily Wrap Up crew. Guys, I don't know if you heard my stomach rumbling, but I'm hungry. So time to get some food up in here. Peace, and I'm out.